Afternoon. I'm Laura's sister. I am an expat New Yorker, grew up here and have been gone for quite a while. My email is from the BX. I will never give it up. At any rate, I'm going to start us off. Some of what I'm going to say I mentioned at the cemetery. I'm going to be brief. Laura and I were not that close. Sometimes that's the way things go, but I have to say that I have a lot of respect for her. She has had a lot of integrity. She was very socially active. As I mentioned, she started early with her advocating for the Liberace TV show as we were growing up. She had been active in abortion rights, and then most recently working with refugees from Africa, helping them with housing assistance and also getting jobs. She had done more things in that vein, but I am not familiar with all of that. My daughter's going to join me in reading something that I thought was pertinent. This I found in something from the Plaza's information online, and it's not written by me, it's written by Sylvia Kamens and Rabbi Jack Reimer. At the rising sun and at its going down, we remember them.
At the blowing of the wind and in the chill of the winter, we remember them.
At the opening of the buds and in the rebirth of spring, we remember them.
At the blueness of the skies and in the warmth of summer, we remember them.
At the rustling of the leaves and in the beauty of the autumn, we remember them.
At the beginning of the year and when it ends, we remember them.
As long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us as we remember them.
When we are weary and in need of strength, we remember them.
When we are lost and sick at heart, we remember them.
When we have decisions that are difficult to make, we remember them.
When we have joy we crave to share, we remember them.
When we have achievements that are based on theirs, we remember them.
For as long as we live, they too will live, for they are now a part of us. We remember them.
Good afternoon. I want to thank Laura's sister Sandy and her niece Michelle for beginning the event. I'd like to speak spontaneously, but I'm not going to do that. I'm Blair Bowles, Laura's partner, domestic partner, not her working partner. We have people from many places at this celebration of Laura's life. That's not surprising, for she had connections in France, in Singapore, Nicaragua, Alaska, Texas, California, Washington State, and Washington, D.C., and many other places. I recently commented to a friend of Laura's that she was beloved around the world. The friend responded, of course she was, because she did not hold back her caring. This is a fine summary of what was special about Laura. She showed that she cared. On the day she went into the emergency room, she posted a note on Facebook about what a lucky day it had been for her. And what had made it a lucky day? Things that happened not to her, but to others. Two of her people who had worked with her to fight the pandemic had ended jobs that day. I had gotten out of the hospital and gone into rehab. My brother had arrived from Nicaragua, and Laura was looking forward to his visit. These things were about other people. And yet Laura said this was a lucky, lucky day. As for her partner, her partner for over 30 years, I was especially rich in the benefits of Laura's caring. 10 years ago, when I was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, Laura came out of the doctor's office swearing that she would never again grumble about my slow pace. And she didn't. As I became increasingly dependent on others to do routine things like put on my shoes and my socks, it crossed my mind that I was getting a lot more than I was giving. But Laura did not complain to me. We even joked about how this summer would be my turn to carry the load while Laura recovered from a planned shoulder surgery. I was looking forward to the chance to give a little payback when the unexpected knocked her down and out. While she was in the hospital, friends from all over came to see her. At first, she was improving and could even be funny. Then she slipped into unconsciousness and stayed that way from the middle of May through all of June and into the first week of July, a total of 51 days. And during the time, people kept coming to visit. It was not easy with Laura's obliviousness to one's presence. Yet people kept coming to thank her for having been such a friend, to play music for her, to read to her, and just to sit beside her, holding her hand. Some came from far town, some came almost every day to pay their respects and their love. On the day she died, I was with her at around noon and saw 4 other visitors. 2 were family from the Pacific Coast, and 2 were longtime friends who came regularly. The doctor and the nurses were astonished that she had lasted so long, and that to the very end she had visitors she never saw. But we knew we were there, and we knew what Laura meant to us and what we meant to Laura. Laura's 75th birthday passed while she was unconscious. It seems too short a life, but it is more than most people get, and Laura lived it all. The recurring themes of her efforts were public health and the women's movement. She was happiest when she could combine the two, as she did when she interrupted her college tuition, college studies to settle in Chicago, where she engaged in a women's help. Could you give me a bottle of water? I'm getting pretty curdly. She interrupted her college students to settle in Chicago, where she engaged in women's self-help collectives that offered midwife services to poor women and abortion services to women who chose that alternative. She finished her undergraduate studies in Chicago and later attended Tufts University in Boston, where she received a master's degree in public health. Then she returned to New York and worked for a time at the New York Health and Hospitals. When I met her, it was in the early 1990s, Laura had become a medical writer. She worked with that until the pandemic arrived in 2020. In the face of a huge public health crisis, she went back to work for New York Health and Hospitals to supervise a team that kept track of where the pandemic was spreading. Of course, when the emergency was declared at an end, she did not put the whole experience behind her. The lucky news she had on the day she ended up in the emergency room was that 2 of the people she had supervised during the pandemic had landed jobs that she had urged them to try for. It was long after she had quit being their supervisor, but she had not stopped caring about what happened to people she knew and liked. In the last years of her life, she found a new cause to take up. She began visiting alien prisoners who had been requested asylum in the United States and who ended up in Elizabeth, New Jersey's detention center. Some of these prisoners were eventually granted asylum. Laura kept caring about their fates and helped them find places to live and work. These asylees were Africans from places Laura knew nothing about. But I recall a conversation we had in which the fact that her grandparents had come from Eastern Europe played a role in her thinking. Her grandmother, was it her great-grandmother? I'm not quite sure. Had come through Ellis Island and had given Laura a safe and prosperous life. These asylum seekers that she worked with deserve the same chance. I know some of the people she worked with, they are getting jobs and showing exactly the sort of hustle that was shown by Laura's ancestors. Laura could have said, these people have nothing to do with me, except that she never could say that sort of thing about people having a hard time. She cared too much. But because she cared, she still had friends from all phases of her life. People who knew her as a child in the Bronx, as a college student, as a feminist radical, as a graduate student, as a return to New Yorker, a writer, an editor, and a gatherer of information about the pandemic. As a friend of refugees, people from all of these backgrounds are here today, and they will tell you about some of the many different ways Laura cared. I'm going to start with Julie and Linda, who've known Laura since college days.
Hi, I'm Julie. And I met Laura when I was a freshman in college. She called my roommate up and I picked up the phone. And we were friends for over 50 years.
I met Laura some 40 odd years ago. I was introduced to her by Julie, and we basically spent those 40 years in New York. We basically did things as a threesome. Anytime Laura found something she wanted that struck her interest, she would call and we would go. And sometimes it was something very unusual. Sometimes it was, a lot of times it was something neither of us would do on our own. But after, we were really glad we did it, and we were really glad she got us off the couch. Laura loved to research. She not only researched for her jobs, but she researched for herself. She had a very curious mind, and she liked to know what was going on in the world and in New York City. So she was also very generous with her research, and she would do research for people who either were having trouble doing it for themselves, and she would help people with resumes, help people find jobs. She was an expert at that. Some of the things that she researched in New York City, and we accompanied her to what shows. She was very, she loved the theater. And even though the Broadway tickets were too expensive, she joined all of these discount theater clubs. And so we would go to all kinds of, I would say, off Broadway. shows. Some of them very strange, but you know, after the show, she never said it was a bad, she always enjoyed it. And some of the other things she kind of got us to do that were not in our, you know, normal path was, she belonged to a hiking club that would go hiking up in the Catskill Mountains. And she got us both to join and to actually go on hikes. Like 10 mile hikes. And, you know, we were kind of amazed at how fast she could hike while talking. So, we were very impressed with that. She also got us to go to exercise classes with her because she constantly wanted to stay in shape. And her favorite class was called the belly buster class, which she really liked because she was particularly good at doing sit-ups. And she could do more sit-ups than almost anyone I've ever seen, and while talking also. And okay. She was a very generous person, not only generous with her time, but also generous even when she was unemployed, donating money to different causes. Whenever she came over for Thanksgiving or Seder, she would start baking, and she would bake at least
2 or 3 things.
2 or 3. Yeah, like, do you remember what she?
Carrot cakes.
Carrot
Zucchini
cake,
breads.
Yeah. And I don't
had,
know
like,
if it
bags of
was,
stuff.
yeah, it was, I don't know if it was because she couldn't decide what to bake or she just couldn't
enjoyed
stop
it.
baking.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, I can't believe she's gone. I'm really gonna miss her. She was like nobody else.
yeah, she was a unique person. And
She was funny and smart.
Blair, I don't want to forget to tell you, but she called me when the night she met you at a writers meeting. What was it? Picnic?
Yeah,
Oh, a picnic.
she was very excited.
Yeah, she was very excited. I met somebody. And I never told you that, but I wanted to tell you, and I was afraid I was gonna forget, but thank you, Julie. An old friend of Laura's wrote, and she planned on reading it here, but she was unable to come. So I agreed to read it. Her name is Heather Booth, and she knew Laura way back in Chicago and kept up with her over the years. Okay. Laura Newman was a values-driven, compassionate, and dedicated person, building a more just and democratic world in a social way and creating caring relationships in a personal way. I knew her from the days of early women's liberation in Chicago with the Chicago's Women's Liberation Union. We had a women's liberation rock band, a liberation school teaching everything from women's history before it was recognized in official education to auto mechanics, organizing for equal pay for janitresses at City Hall, to the underground abortion service of Jane. Laura was one of the women of Jane who, before Roe v. Wade, helped over 11,000 women with an abortion. Laura helped women get pregnancy tests, something that was difficult for unmarried women in those days. It was a courageous and thrilling effort, taking charge of our future. And because we organized, we really did change the world, and Laura was part of all that. She was a talented health researcher and writer, combining her caring and her professional talents. She wrote the obituary for my father, who was a remarkable physician. And while there were other obituaries in major newspapers, hers was probably the most thoughtful and detailed about his history. She put in the time, the work, the effort, reflecting her dedication and commitment and caring. She put her whole heart into what she cared about. And she did care so much. When I lived in Washington, D.C., and she lived in New York City, she traveled to D.C. a few times to visit me to reconnect. She stayed in touch online and kept connected to the world and its events, and always looking for how she could make it better and how she could contribute. At this time, when we are on a knife's edge between democracy and authoritarian rule, when so many of the advances that Laura fought for and helped to win are being threatened, one great tribute we can provide for Laura to keep her wonderful spirit and memory alive is to continue those struggles for a more just world with the compassion, dedication, and commitment that she would bring. And then we do the real honor to her memory and our caring for her.
Hi, I'm Susan Shappert. I live outside Washington, D.C. And I'd like to talk to you today about how I remember Laura. I think many of you here today know her from many different areas, through journalism or jobs, her work with asylum seekers, or just life in New York. But you may not know as much about her early days. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I first met Laura when we were both first-year graduate students at Tufts University in 1976. We were both enrolled in a very new program. It's called the Program for Urban, Social, and Environmental Policy, or PUSEP for short. She was in the health track of the department, and I was in the housing and community development track. We both had an interest in sociology and both took courses together in the sociology department. Laura was 5 years older than me, and I was kind of surprised. She sort of took me under her wing at that time. She was much more savvy and sophisticated, I thought, and she had that already very impressive resume in the feminist movement. So I was surprised, but very glad that she and I got along so well together. During our second year of graduate school, we bonded even more through a daily exercise program. We exercised together every morning with a few other women in our program, running and doing calisthenics under the guidance of the school's football coach, Rocky Carzo, who was a sort of legendary figure on the Tufts campus. His mantra was PMA, positive mental attitude. And this became a byword or catchphrase between Laura and me for years to come. She would always say, Susan, remember your PMA, whenever I got upset about something. And I would say, Laura, PMA, Laura, whenever she was upset about something too. After our workouts, we would cool off with a swim in the beautiful Tufts pool. And then we would go for a very hearty breakfast in the cafeteria, which we felt we deserved after all that exercise. And then we usually retreated to our study carols in the basement of the Tufts Library to try to work on our master's theses, which often wasn't too successful. Blair told me he recently found Laura's master's thesis, which I just saw yesterday in their apartment. It had probably sat in a box for many, many years unopened, but I can tell you that it was the successful result of much hard work, and knowing Laura, you could almost say much obsessive work to complete this thesis. We were by then part of a support group of other women in the program who were struggling with completing our thesis on time, probably not on time. But we learned through that group some words of advice from Dr. Sheldon Krimsky, our program advisor, who Laura remained close to for many years after leaving Tufts. And he taught us 5 pages a day. That was another one of our little things we shared. Whenever there was a big task, it was just 5 pages a day to get that thing done. But even then, Laura's passion for women's voices and women's rights, especially with regard to healthcare, was evident in her selection of a thesis topic. It was a study of primary data to track and analyze cesarean section rates in pregnancy. Her goal was to raise awareness about unnecessary C-sections, especially in older women. And I think she was at the forefront of that issue. She always wanted to improve the lives of others, as many of you here can attest to. Well, after such a close friendship of several years' duration, I was very distressed to learn a few years later that Laura was going to leave the Boston area and return to her native New York. I think she felt the opportunities were just better for her in New York, and maybe Boston just wasn't exciting enough for her anymore. But her move to New York led to a new long-distance relationship between us, filled with many, many, many phone calls and the occasional visit. Eventually, I too left Boston for marriage and a job in Washington, D.C. But the good news was now I was closer to New York, so we could get together more often. But our phone relationship continued through the decades, along with vacations together at Cape Cod and trips back and forth between our 2 cities. I treasure the memories of those times together, the most recent being a weekend last December when my husband, Daniel, and I came to see their new co-op apartment, very proud first-time homeowners. And we went to the Whitney Museum. Laura and I both loved the art of Edward Hopper, and we saw that great exhibit there and did a lot of other fun things. And that's all I want to say about our early years together, but I couldn't stop without saying a few things that really stand out for me in the course of our relationship. First, Laura could have been a social planner. She was always trying to influence my social calendar, asking me on the phone all the time, Susan, when are you coming to New York? And always sending me links to a film festival that she thought I might like, or a museum exhibit that she thought I would enjoy. She would also send me notices of special deals like Amtrak fares, like special deals for Amtrak, or shoe sales, anything. She was always sending me things to, that I could use somehow, which leads me to another major aspect of our friendship, shopping. Laura, as many of you probably know, was a dedicated shopper. Whenever she came to visit me in DC, no matter what else we were doing, she would ask me, can we go to Costco? Or can we go to Target? Maybe both. And we would both end up trying things on and hanging out in the dressing room and usually buying stuff together. Even at Cape Cod, she wanted me to take her to TJ Maxx. So she couldn't get enough of that. She loved to shop, but even more, I think she loved me to spend money on things she thought I should buy. She was always giving me advice about what to buy, and she was often right. I loved shopping with her. It was a simple pleasure, but one which none of my other friends seemed to enjoy as much as Laura did. So I really treasure that shopping time together. It was fun spending time with her because you could count on meeting some total strangers that she would engage in conversation, and they would often reveal some useful information to her. She was always fascinated to know what other people thought about things, seeking opinions on various topics, as those of you who know her from Facebook are already aware of. And people were so willing to open up to her. When we were out together, she had this uncanny ability to somehow draw people in very quickly and easily, so they would treat her almost like an old friend. She was so articulate and had this easy affability. I don't know how she did it, but she could meet people everywhere. Laura was a demanding friend in some ways, but she was also a generous one, as you've heard from other people before me. What I especially loved about her was that she was mostly non-judgmental with me. I tried to be the same way with her. I didn't have to worry about something I did or said that unknowingly might have offended her. We tended to accept each other for what we were, I think, and I was always grateful to her for that. We shared many, many happy times together. Quite simply, Laura was the sister I never had, one of my very best friends, and my trusted advisor on everything from the latest health issues to buying the best pair of sneakers. I miss her terribly, but somehow I feel she is still here. Laura, you'll be pleased to know I finally found a pair of Brooks sneakers that seem to fit me after buying and returning about a dozen other pairs. Your friendship has been a great and powerful blessing over the last almost 47 years. I will cherish that memory and love you always.
I don't remember when I met Laura. It must have been in the early 1990s. And the reason I don't remember, and I'm sure she wouldn't remember meeting me, is that we were reading each other's articles for so many years that I just thought I knew Laura Newman, the medical writer. It's like you think you know Maggie Haberman because she's on CNN every morning. So we had sort of a mutual admiration society. We did meet in person at the offices of the scientists in Philadelphia. I sort of vaguely remember meeting her there, and we felt as if we'd known each other forever just because of all the reading we'd done. And we very quickly became coworkers and friends, and our writing always complemented rather than overlapping. And that sort of set the stage for decades of us helping each other. She got me my gig at Medscape. I wrote 500 articles for them thanks to her. And I got her a job at a biotech magazine. I knew the scientists, she knew the doctors, and especially when COVID started and all of a sudden I wasn't writing about DNA so much as I was writing about, respirators and hospitals and things. No matter what hospital I mentioned in the New York City area, she knew somebody there. She knew a doctor who would actually speak to me. So she was enormously helpful. We did early on form a bond over a very strange negative thing. We belonged to the National Association of Science Writers, and we noticed that it was sort of a popularity contest where the big shot writers from the New York Times or whatever, they'd always be giving each other awards and giving each other titles. And we'd get these lists of the top 10 articles, the top 20 articles. She and I were never on any lists. And she used to call up and say, Ricky, there's another list out that we didn't make. So we kind of joined this club pitying ourselves. So the most striking memory I have of Laura was bizarre. We, with the scientists, with about a dozen other writers and all our editors, went to the American Association for the Advancement of Science annual meeting in Boston, February. I don't even know what year it was, but we had a special luncheon, 12 of us writers and editors, and Oliver Sacks, who wrote The Man Who Mistook His Wife for a Hat and Awakenings and all that. And Laura and I and my 12-year-old daughter was sitting right opposite Dr. Sacks. And we had salad or soup or something, and he sort of just conked over into his food. And Laura and I thought he had died. And we didn't know what to do. And we were just like, my daughter was flipping out. We were just sort of sitting there. And by the time we got our wits about us, he gurgled and he sat back up. So for some reason, that was a strange thing that we never forgot. Well, Laura had favorite things, like people have mentioned the off Broadway shows and the shopping and, sort of normal things, but she was very comfortable trying new things. And the new thing that was most surprising to me was that she went to a fish show. And I don't mean like flounder, fish, PHISH, at the jam band. Out of her comfort zone for sure, but she put on a hippie dress, and with my friend Wendy, the three of us went to fish. She was such a good sport. She probably didn't like it very much, but she totally got into it. But there was a second fish show the next night, and she kind of nicely said, is it okay if I go with your husband instead? So they went to the movies, and she couldn't take it more than a whole night. Well, what does a science writer do? Blair asked me to mention that. We did magazine writing, and you get an idea for a story, or an editor will call you up and say, this is what we want you to write about. You have to read the technical literature, and you have to find sources, which she was always expert at. And then you'd interview the sources, which in the olden days were done in person or on the phone. Now you sort of do it by email, and all the writing comes out. Still did. But we would do that. And then by writing the article, you have a very brief lead, and then you have what's called a nut graph. She told me about nut graphs, where you just sort of get the whole story in 3 sentences. And then you intersperse the quotes with your own words, with the narrative. And the skill of being an effective journalist is to get that down, to know when your words are better than the words of somebody else. And Laura had an astonishing knack to do that really, really well. Complimenting, she would call me with all her biotech questions. And if they veered too much towards chemistry, I put my husband Larry on the phone because he was a chemist. So he was very helpful too. Laura was a very gifted science and medical writer, and she wrote a blog called Patient Point of View. And I do wish she would have become better known, because I mean, she got an area that nobody else was really covering. So I Googled it the other day, and the last entry I could find was 2018. And I want to read this quote from what she put on her page. For decades, I have listened to often inarticulate men mansplaining about health and medicine. be it clinical medicine or policy. They rarely engage their readers as many women writers do. Consider standing down not only any all-male panels, but those with a token woman. It's time to listen to a heck of a lot more sharp women journalists and bloggers. And after that, she listed all of her favorite blogs written by women in a way that people hadn't really done for her all those years. Well, as others have said, Laura's volunteer work really defined her. And one of those, the women, one of the prisoners, she put me in touch with one or two of them, and I developed letter writing conversations with them as well. And I sent them something. So she was always advocating for the asylum seekers, and she brought her friends in with it as well. And then came COVID. And she just stepped up to the plate. She completely reinvented herself. And I would just tell so many people, my friend who's the supervisor of the contact traces, I'm so proud of her for what she did. And it was an astonishing second rebirth career for someone. And I'm very proud to have been her friend for so long.
Well, I met Laura at the New Jewish Agenda, which gives you an idea of our politics. And in hearing the remembrances, there is a recurring theme that comes out. And well, there's a line from Brecht. Things are going very badly for our side. I think that the important message here is that we can combine our social activism with good journalism. In fact, the better the journalism is, the better, more effective our social activism can be. Laura lived in my neighborhood, and she used to call me to help her assemble her IKEA furniture. I was writing for medical magazines, she was writing for medical magazines, and as Ricky explained, Laura and I used to help each other. She taught me some important things from her medical background. She was she was editor of medical guidelines and outcomes alert. And the important thing I learned from that was the importance of evidence-based medicine. It was one of the most important lessons I learned about journalism. One of these ideas that a professor can give you that makes the whole thing fall into place, which you're always looking for in a story. She was like one of those professors who gets comments on their Rate My Professors. It's a tough course, but it's worth it. And Laura was the person I would call on for my personal medical problems when you want to know about what's going on in your medical community. I remember how I was sitting on a gurney in Roosevelt Hospital, and the medical resident told me that I had appendicitis, but it could be taken care of with a quick, simple operation. So in a moment like that, I called Laura, and 10 minutes later, she was in Roosevelt Hospital. And I remember her first words were, she was on her way back from the supermarket, and her first words were, "Is there any place I can put this ice cream?" And as it turned out, I decided to go with the medical treatment of appendicitis, which is actually a little safer than the surgery for people my age. Well, now there's a hole in my life for all of us, for all of these things. There are all those times that I could ask Laura for advice or tell her about something interesting. Those moments that I really can't fill anymore. Laura used to write obituaries for the Lancet and for some of our writers' newsletters. And I had always expected that she would someday write my obituary. And I'm actually sorry that the situation is reversed. I don't think I'll find anyone else who could do as good a job. But if there is one point that I keeps recurring, I think it is that is her political activism is important, and that we shouldn't give up even in the worst of times, and that our journalism can contribute to our activism in ways that have no conflict with our journalistic principles. So I guess, so that's it. And, I thank you all for sharing your memories with me.
Laura's illness and potential death, it was inconceivable to me. I've tried to understand what made her illness and death so impossible. For me, she felt larger than life. This was due to her intensity of emotion, her strong confidence in her beliefs, her pleasure in life, her vitality. Also, Laura's intellect, which was paired with her intense engagement in what was happening in the world. She never gave up on her causes or her sense of justice. She was also such a constant presence in my life, and I learned so much from her. Laura and I met through our membership in the Appalachian Mountain Club as Julie and Linda, although this was probably later. Hiking group. She described many of the leaders in the group as overly fit, elderly Jewish people who treated hikes as races to be accomplished. When we were doing them, we were often at the end, which we would then become the sweep because you were supposed to make sure nobody was left behind by the group. An early memory I have of Laura is of going to the Delaware Water Gap to an AMC lodge. And Laura had made this delicious gazpacho, which she bought, but it wasn't in large quantities. And we were staying in some kind of facility that had it was open space. So there was an older man who was continually heating up Dinty Moore beef stew for every meal. And Laura found the humor in this because it was a horrendous smell. Later, I expected that as we aged, Laura would find the humor in the new indignities we faced. I knew she would find the humor in that. I come from a very political, progressive family. Nonetheless, I learned about so much from Laura. I learned about feminism, about the movement to bring sensitive prenatal care to impoverished Black women in Chicago in the 60s. I learned about the early women's rock group, Fanny. She was always on the lookout for new plays, new art, new music. I guess we went to a play about the doctor who experimented with gynecological care on slaves. I mean, things I would not have picked, but And then I think shortly after that, they took down his statue in New York, although there's constantly going back and forth with whether he helped women or harmed, he did both. She empathized with every marginalized group. She wasn't embarrassed by her emotions, as I learned to be in my family. And I found that very powerful because I guess in Jewish families, I think there was often a feeling like emotions were, the women were like time bombs with their emotions. It was to be feared at all costs. And she was not afraid of her emotions. Of times, Laura's expectations of me as a friend were very high. At those times, I felt trapped, not wanting to overextend myself and not wanting to fail her. We both found that hurtful and were not able to talk out these impasses. I regret not pushing to talk things out more. Right before COVID struck, my partner, Louis Mercado, had a very severe nerve compression in his lower back. In his case, it was very complicated because of other conditions he had. And this required immediate emergency surgery. Laura and Blair were able to convince the hospital staff to let them into the pre-op room, which was already crowded with so many medical professionals. And that was just this lovely example of the support they gave us.
I'm here. My name is Hal Getzinger, and excuse my voice, I have a bit of a head cold, but I wasn't going to miss this. I met Laura about 20 years ago when her cousin Keith introduced us. From then on, she was a consistent presence in my life. Like many others, I was always contacted about the movie to see, the movie exhibit, the museum exhibit to see, or $5 theater tickets. These outings would also often include a trip to TJ Maxx or the neighborhood diner, The Flame. I have many good memories of these outings. Laura got me literally out in the streets for causes that we both believed in. With her, I marched in the Women's March and in the Pride Parade. And a few of you here were there with us. I will remember Laura for her active mind, her sense of humor, and her knowledge of many things. As others have said, she cared very much about people, and she cared about me. If she knew I was sick or she knew I was facing a challenge, I could count on her to check in on me. I remember her simply as a friend, and I will miss her very much.
As we heard today was obviously a main theme of many of her emails, and she always kept me up to date on matters she thought would be of importance to me. Naturally, as we've also heard, COVID and her great work as a contact tracer fueled quite a few emails to me. However, tips could range to things like how to lower your cholesterol, which is probably the one medical affliction I haven't had yet, to women's health issues and women's rights issues of all sorts, all filled my inbox. Randomly, I would hear from her about tickets to concerts in Boston, or one day she sent me an email about the bigotry of the DAR. And I don't know, Blair, if you ever told her that your mother, as you know, quit the DAR in 1939 when they wouldn't let the great African-American opera singer Marian Anderson sing in their Constitution Hall due to her race. She sent me comments about why the wrong person won the Oscars, sales at Macy's where she scored big, lots of emails, complaints about diets, requests for recipes, and more lately, her upset with anti-woke censorship. Laura was always eager to visit Boston, which some of you had a shared history there with her. And she commented on our enjoying iced coffees and conversation together on New England summer days. Yet really, the main focus of her emails to me were about Blair. She wrote me about this and that, always trying to find ways, Blair, to make your life better or happier. There is no doubt, Blair, that you were the center of her gravity, her life's mate, and the love of her life. I have to laugh reading through 360 plus emails just sent in the last years, because Laura was determined to get Blair to eat more vegetables. Numerous messages involved, mostly on her part, unsuccessful attempts to add more veggies to Blair's repertoire of foods. There was an entire email thread, for example, devoted to cauliflower. Periodically, she would tell me that her goal was to get Blair and the other Bowleses in New York at that time to eat Brussels sprouts. Laura told me that she was going to bring a Brussels sprouts side dish to a Bowles gathering. I cautioned gingerly that the sprouts may go uneaten if after all those years, the Bowleses still opted to avoid them. Yet valiantly, she tried one more time, but reported back to me there was little success on the Brussels sprouts front. However, several years ago, Laura sent me an email. There was no text, but the subject line said, Blair ate kale, exclamation point. From matters small to global, Laura, though not a famous woman, shaped our lives poignantly. Blair, Laura loves you wherever she is, and her love for you will guide you and nurture you always. Of that I am sure. George Eliot wrote Middlemarch about 150 years ago, but her remarks about women seeking lives filled with meaning remind me today of Laura and Laura's importance to all she knew and cared for. The growing good of the world is partly dependent on unhistoric acts, and that things are not so ill with you and me as they might have been is half owing to the number who lived faithfully a hidden life and rest in unvisited tombs.
I had known Laura, Tia Laura, we called her, for 30 years. She was my Uncle Blair's girlfriend since I was a boy, and she made a big impression. She always came with Blair to our family gatherings at the house in Brooklyn, which was no small trip from the Upper West Side, but that's what you have to do to see loved ones in New York. And Laura was a great New Yorker. She was always very eager to go out and experience what this city had to offer her. We went together as a family to concerts and movies and baseball games. In the years that I knew Aunt Laura, she was with us in many different apartments for Thanksgivings and Christmases and birthdays and casual Sunday pancakes. As lucky as I am to have a close family, I'm more lucky to have had her be a part of it for as long as she was. I'd like to tell you about the last conversation I had with Laura. My Uncle Blair had recently had an accident, and my wife and I were visiting him in the hospital. As we left, I called Laura to update her as much as I could. She was understandably upset and anxious about Blair, but mostly she was regretful that the two of them would now be unable to attend an upcoming family wedding that they had both been looking forward to. She thanked me again for visiting and told me she loved me. At the time, I was struck how sweet she was to have our family in the front of her mind while she was anxious about her partner. And later I realized how lucky I was to have had a chance to connect that way with her for what turned out to be the last time. I have only a little knowledge about Laura's charity in her life. There are people here and people not here that know from personal experience her work as an activist in Chicago, or more recently, working to help refugees here in New York. She was truly a unique figure in my life, not only as an example of someone who wasn't afraid to ask for what she needed, but also as someone dedicated to volunteerism in her own life. I knew her through her good and loving acts over the years as my Aunt Laura. She liked to give me books she thought I would like, and she liked to start conversations about music and baseball to engage with us. She was very quick with a compliment and always wanted to know what was on the horizon for me. More important than any of that for me was that she was, for most of my life, was a great partner to my uncle. They seemed to me to be a great match, supportive of each other and supportive of my family. I've been grateful for her many times in my life as someone that my uncle could love and depend on. Laura and my uncle were a great vision of partners whose compatibility equaled more than their individual parts. Laura's passing has been painful and baffling for our family, and certainly leaves a hole. Sitting Shiva for her a few weeks ago, I saw the hole that she had left in her other communities as well. I saw that she was someone who was able to give herself openly and honestly to achieve as much good as she could manage in the time that she was given. And I'll miss her.
I'm Laura's cousin. I'm a couple of years older than her. And what I'll miss the most about Laura is her sense of humor. And I don't know how long ago, but when she was still living in Manhattan, there was a little Greek diner on the corner that she was very fond of frequenting. And of course, being Laura, she knew everybody. And she knew the intricacies of all their relationships. It was a family that ran and owned it with a matriarch in charge. It was called the Morning Star. And we had so many funny conversations about it. I'd never been there, but it was vivid based on Laura's descriptions. We decided at one point to try to write a sitcom about it. And that never got off the ground, but we had a great time planning it and joking about it. Laura was someone I could always call to cheer me up if I felt a little upset about something or depressed. And I'll always remember the good times that we had. I admired Laura, I admired her intellect, and I admired her bravery. She was someone who could have made a fortune working for pharmaceutical companies, but she would never do anything like that. And I'll miss her. I'll miss her a lot.
My name is Ilana Wallach, and please forgive my croaky voice. I'm here mainly as a messenger to read a statement from somebody who could not be here in person. More about him in a second. I know Laura because of Shalom Friends, a small group of people who got together in 2017 to visit immigrants, mostly asylum seekers in detention. And she was an absolutely key member of that group. We were visiting people who were literally running for their lives. And we spoke across the table about, about how awful the food was and about what happened to them at home. Knowing in a way that we were talking to people who were really on the edge And it really mattered, every conversation and every action any of us were able to take for them. That's how I know her. I'm sad the more I hear about her that I didn't really know her personally as a personal friend, but we had a lot in common. I think everyone who knew her will understand if I say, like her, if our, let's just say, the umbrella organization with whom we worked, if they said, no, you can't do this, no, I would say, watch me. And if they said no again, I'd say, how do I do it? That was her, in her exponentially to my stubbornness. So I'm gonna read a few lines by Hannah Senish, and then I'll read the statement by the statement from Mathieu. So Hannah Senish wrote, there are stars whose radiance is visible on Earth, though they have long been extinct. There are people whose brilliance continues to light the world, even though they are no longer among the living. These lights are particularly bright when the night is dark. They light the way for humankind. And now I have a statement from Mathieu, who in English calls himself Matthew. Several of us visited him when he was detained, or when he was a prisoner at Elizabeth's Detention Center. He's a French speaker, and he uses the word témoignage. I hope I got that right at the beginning, which literally means witness. And I wanted to just bring that to your attention. I think in English we might call it statement, but it's more than that. Dear friends, dear Bowles and Newman families, dear all. As a friend of our late Laura, I want to share my sympathy and share the pain and evoke the memory of a being full of vitality, generosity, and hospitality, who shared with all the joy of living, love, and humor from every angle. I knew Laura in a very difficult context of my life. I had just obtained my political asylum after having spent 14 months of arbitrary and unjust detention. I was released after winning my asylum, very depressed, and I had lost part of the hope in my life. At first, there was the challenge of finding accommodation in New York. Through Barbara, that's another person in this group, I was able to find refuge at Seafarers International House for just 1 month. Unfortunately, it was the period of COVID-19. After 2 weeks, the director, Pastor Luther Dredge, invited me to his office to inform me that Seafarers International House had been requisitioned by the authorities of New York to isolate and quarantine COVID-19 cases and close contacts, and that we must all leave in a week. I was completely panicked because I had nowhere to go. The next day, the director contacted me again to tell me that he had found a place for me, but only for 2 weeks. This is how I moved in to Uta, who welcomed me into her home and who offers a temporary stay to other asylees. I confess that I had completely lost my sleep because after 2 weeks, I would have nowhere to go, and the last option was the street. During this anxious period, my friend Barbara explained my situation to Laura. Without delay, Laura contacted me 2 days before the end of the 2 weeks. First, she reassured me by telling me that she had spoken with her husband, Blair. I think they were still partners. They married later than that. And that they had decided to lodge me with them unconditionally. I cried with joy and jumped up alone into the room when I heard those words from Laura. When I moved in the next day with Laura and Blair, I admit she treated me like a loving and caring mother treats her son. She lodged, fed, cajoled, consoled, advised, and supported me financially. Nothing was lacking. In addition, she also activated her contacts early to find me a job. So after only 2 weeks, she found me my first temporary job at Mount Sinai Hospital, where we were testing the quality of the masks that medical staff wore during the COVID-19 pandemic. After this job, she helped me find another job within New York City Health and Hospitals, Test and Trace Corps, right? Where we were public health advisors, supervisors for COVID-19 for 18 months. When I got this second job, she told me to save money little by little because her main goal was to see me happy after spending 14 months in an illegal detention center and jail. After 3 months, I suggested to Laura to find me a room elsewhere where I will start to build my life and take on responsibilities. After listening to me carefully, she looked me straight in the eye and told me in a categorical tone, "You are not going anywhere. This is your home. Until I am reassured that you can live alone, I will not let you go." I waited a month to approach her for the second time, and she said, "I feel like I'm dealing with a stubborn child who doesn't listen to advice from her mother." As I was stubborn, it is true. I approached her again the third time, but this time with proof of my bank statements, as if to say, I am financially ready to take charge of my room. Finally, 5 months later, she contacted Brendan, her friend with whom she worked by helping refugees, immigrants, and asylum seekers in New York and New Jersey to help me find a room to rent in Queens. After 2 weeks of research, Brendan was able to find a room for rent at a reasonable cost. The day I was moving, she looked me in the eye again and said, "I'm letting you go in spite of my will. Come and look over your room. If you can't hold on, you must immediately come back home because your room is always here for you." I took this example on myself to testify to this beautiful soul, Laura. To her love, her affection, her attention, her hospitality, and her unconditional support during her lifetime for immigrants, refugees, and asylum seekers in New York and New Jersey. She always helped and maintained communication, even with some immigrants and asylum seekers who were illegally deported to Africa and elsewhere. Laura was an exceptional woman, vigorous and very dedicated to the cause of vulnerable people. She campaigned for justice, human rights, and equality. I conclude my testimony with this little poem for my mother, my friend Laura. There are tears that never stop flowing, voids that never fill, memories that never fade, and people that will never be replaced. The smiles come back, but only to hide the pain. That's what we will continue to live. However, you will always remain in our hearts and thoughts because those we love never go away. Your memory will always be a sun in our hearts because memory does not die. It just falls asleep. To talk about you is to make you exist. To say nothing would be to forget you. Each passing day weaves the invisible thread of your memory. The memory of happy days soothes the pain. At the time of your death, we still have millions of memories of you to feed each of our days of life. Life only lasts for a moment. Our love is eternal. We won't forget you. We will love you forever. May your beautiful works continue to shine in the hearts and minds of all immigrants, refugees, and asylees that you helped and you restored smiles and gave hope to in New York City, New Jersey, and across the world. And may the love that united you with your dear and lovely husband, Blair, and with all of us, and you have left us inconsolable, continues to live forever. Rest in peace, beautiful soul.
My name is Michelle. I'm Laura's niece, and two memories come to mind from my time that I got to spend with Laura. One of them is a story that was passed down, but many of you have spoken about her activism. When we were a kid, at some point, the story was told. Laura had been arrested when she was in Chicago, and my grandma helped bail her out, but thought she got bailed out for raising her hand towards the judge in an upward motion. Turns out she flicked off the judge, but I'm sure it was for a good cause and something she believed in. She put her heart and soul in everything. She made sure her actions matched her rhetoric. One of the biggest challenges she took on that none of you have mentioned is she got my grandma to use email. She was able to buy it. At this time, it wasn't even a computer, it was called My Mail Station. And I thought she was up against unbeatable odds. And somehow, with patience, she taught her how to use it, how to check it, and miraculously, when we left, she continued to use it. So as many of you have mentioned, Laura was a stubborn, loving person who always liked to get a good deal.